All right. Well, welcome. Welcome everyone to our Songs for Justice Volume 4 webinar, in which we are featuring issues related to women's issues around women's rights and everything from voting to well the whole gamut that we'll get into. But thanks for tuning in. I'm John Gertie, founder and executive director of Music for Everyone. I just want to let you know, read real quickly why now, why MFE on this project, Songs for Justice. Music has always been a powerful platform to highlight, frame, and spur change regarding issues related to justice and equality. While we all have a responsibility to bear witness to events around us, for musicians and artists, that responsibility is far more fundamental. It's the essence of what they do. Now more than ever, musicians and other creatives have the responsibility to leverage their voices to illuminate injustice and inequality in an effort to generate debate and stimulate change. MFE's mission is to cultivate the power of music to transform lives, schools, and communities. The explosion of civil unrest that boiled over after the killing of George Floyd forced us to consider how we might leverage our resources and music's power and potential to meet that mission in the context of these current events. And the fact that the majority of students and families we serve consist of people of color only intensified that feeling of responsibility to act in a concrete and meaningful way. As a result, MFE's Songs for Justice project was born. Songs for Justice is a convergence of music, spoken word, visual arts, poetry, history, design, as well as discussion questions, and on a series of vinyl 45 records that we will release periodically moving forward. Each record will feature various leaders, events, and narratives around an array of civil and human rights causes and issues. We hope that each of these records and the music, speeches, art, and information contained in them will provide context and insight to inspire you to reflect and act upon issues relating to justice and equality. Only until we become better educated, more willing to engage in honest dialogue, and commit to behavioral change can we move forward together in creating a more just and equitable society. Before introducing our participants, I want to thank the sponsors who have made this webinar possible. Among them are the Presser Foundation, Lancaster County Community Foundation, Benchmark Construction, Lancaster History, Listrak, and Giant. So the business part of things is out of the way now. I want to now take this opportunity to introduce the panelists. First, we have Jackie Hines Links. There she is. She's out in California today. She's up early for this. She's an American singer-songwriter, producer, and multi-instrumentalist. She brings her own blend of daydream choruses, indie rock vocals, and star-like textures to the forefront. Her powerful yet wholesome songwriting showcases her strength in taking a single moment and blowing it up to a heartstring anthem. Since 2018, she's been telling her story to try to find what connects us all, most recently with the release of Obvious, which has been featured on American Songwriter and Spotify editorial playlist, Today's Singer-Songwriters. That's Jackie. Thanks for being here, Jackie. Thundercat. Where are you, Thundercat? There she is. She's a writer and spoken word poet from Baltimore, Maryland, based out of Lancaster, PA. She's been word bending. I love that. She's been word bending for as long as she's been able to hold a pen, but has only referred to herself as a poet since taking a creative writing class during her senior year of high school. Through her poetry, Thundercat tells the stories of the unheard, fills her voice to amplify those before her that could not speak, and encourages those after her to never forget the power of their voice. Keisha Finney, who did the visual arts for this project, is unfortunately can't join us today. She has some health issues, but her inspiration, so we'll show her picture in a little bit, her painting in a little bit. Her inspiration comes from simply living life and being a woman of color. She writes, "I've used my art to express my thoughts and feelings around self-identity. Being a Black is a big part of that because the world never forgets to remind me. My art comes from a combination of my love for nature, vibrant color, texture, and the female form. It's a reflection of myself while connecting the viewer to my perspective of the world." Next is Marianne Cologne. We're having a little bit of technical difficulties with Marion, but because we can't see her, but I think she's still here. She's born in Flint, Michigan, and raised in Lancaster. Marion is a poet whose style is direct and provocative. She challenges the reader with uncomfortable truths. As a youth, she felt that her voice was always silenced, which has driven her to think deeply regarding human choices and behaviors, and led her to become not simply a writer, but to write fearlessly. Allison Kibler is here. Allison is a professor of women's gender and sexuality studies and American studies at Franklin and Marshall College. And then there's also Christina Duncan. Christina joined Milagro House as its executive director in 2017. She brings more than 20 years of experience working in nonprofit management, development, and marketing. Christina has a strong personal commitment to align herself with organizations and initiatives that empower individuals and families to live full and productive lives free from the boundaries defined by poverty, lack of education, and discrimination. So she is the executive director of Milagro House. And we have Marion. Marion, we can see her now. That's excellent. Thank you. Brendan, can we ask you real quickly to put up the cover again? Can you do that real quickly? There you go. We just wanted to show this again, the cover of Volume 4. That is an awesome picture. I tell you, that kid is going to change the world. There's no question about it. But I wanted to mention that photo's taken by Joya Snyder. And she was really excited about being a part of this project because she's had several MFE programs impact her directly, including Keys for the City. So with those introductions made, we want to start by asking a question of Jackie, Thunda, and Marianne. Can you each talk about the role and responsibility of artists, musicians, etc., as it applies to issues of justice, human rights, and equity? How about Thunda, you want to start?
Sure. Sure. So I believe that we as creatives and producers of consumable art, we make things relatable, make things real in a way. I feel like it's very easy to detach from what's going on around you if you don't feel like you are directly a part of it. But if it's presented to you in a more digestible way or a more colorful way, I guess you could say, it makes it more real. It makes you realize why you should be paying attention and what you can do as an individual to make a change.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Jackie, how about you?
Thanks, John. Yeah, I mean, Thunda's completely right. I think it's incredibly important to make what you say to at least the general public, who can sometimes just be like swimming in like unknown water and not really knowing where they stand, or not knowing what to look for. It to make something digestible that they can look at or to listen to or dance to is really important. And I think what falls on artists' shoulders a lot is like, what is it that you need to say to people to not make social change happen, but make it known that it needs to and what they can do to help. And I wrote down some songs that I thought were pretty good at this. Sunday, Bloody Sunday by U2, I think is a great example. Freedom by Beyonce, American Idiot by Green Day, and White Riot by The Clash. Like those are 4 completely different genres, but they all kind of talk about a revolution. And especially now more than ever with social media being so easily attainable to the youth, I think it's so important now to really speak to them and give them hope too.
Mm-hmm. All right, thank you. Marion, how about you?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, yes.
Do you mind asking the question again?
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about the role and responsibility of artists, musicians, poets, creatives in general, as it applies to issues of justice, human rights, and equity? What's your role as an artist?
I have, we have many roles as artists, trying to be different and the same at the same time, if that makes sense. Setting ourselves apart and paving a way as a way was paved for us, and being very, I'm trying to pick the right words, having wisdom in every step that is taking, because we won't be here, 100 years from now, and what we do and the things we say and what we stand for will reflect later on. As you know, we're standing here today, we're talking about this because everything has come to this very moment, and being very cautious, but not cautious at the same time, breaking rules, but following the rules. And that's where, I stand with it. It's like an oxymoron with everything. It's trying to go right and left and make both ways the right way, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Brendan, can we now play? We want to play a short clip from Jackie's song that is on side A of this record, and it's titled Evergreen. Can we pull that up?
Every time I find the meaning of life, it changes. A generation of ultraviolet ranges. Suddenly it shifts the gears to waves by the ocean. Can't control it. Suddenly I wonder if we're all here for the moment. Do we know it? I don't wanna lie, I don't wanna die in the wake of the eye of the storm. Wondering how, if there is so much time, then where's the line leading to something more? They say to find it in me and grow.
There you go. That's good. That's side A by Jackie. All right. Brendan, can we now put up Keisha Finney's? Again, this is the Songs for Justice Project. Each of these records is a multidisciplinary platform for artists to bear witness. And part of that is the visual arts. And I'm hoping Brendan can put up, yeah, here's Keisha's, The Strength of a Woman. And she writes, my inspiration behind this piece is centered around women's rights to vote, education, equal pay. I wanted something that could be related to every kind of woman, no matter what she looks like, while portraying the message that women supporting women is a force in itself. We're stronger together. So that's a piece, a wonderful piece by Keisha Finney. Yeah, so that's on the inside cover. Okay, now if we can, Brendan, if we can ask Thunder, you're ready, right? Thundercat's gonna read her spoken word piece, and the spoken word piece is on the back side B of the record, okay? So Thunder, do you want to recite your piece? It's titled For Every Woman.
Yes. Oh, I didn't know he was going to put it up for me. That's very kind. So this piece is called For Every Woman. This is a man's world. That's what James said. No good without women or girls, a fact that hasn't been faced yet. She dropped gems worth more than diamonds and pearls. yet still can't seem to get ahead in this world. She, for reasons that remain unknown, is expected to give her all down to her very soul. She, obliged, is beat down, still she rises, always showing up even with no one's behind her. She's praying her cries be heard by rolling thunder, not realizing she's the eighth world wonder, capable of more than just wife or mother, potential untapped while they try to keep us under and tell us that we're less than, we're weaker, not as smart nor eager, undeserving of our place in a world we help create. Literal DNA in the ether, she remains strong through changing weather, thoroughly skilled in thankless work for being born Tina and not Trevor. When the truth is anything he can do, she can do better. A woman's life is like a daily fight for the right to exist, a right you were born with. Yet almost every decision she wants to make in her life is governed by old white men. Taking part in the female struggle these days seems like a hobby. Where do you get off making laws about what I can and can't do with my body? These are the reasons y'all should stay in a man's place, and daily I'm reminded. If you could, I know you would take time and rewind it to a time before we snatched up our freedoms one by one. Have it your way and we'd be allowed to do nothing under the sun. You put limitations on what you fear in an attempt to control, but to be female is a divinity housed deep within the soul. You won't admit it, but you need us. Hard truth served cold. You are the plant withering out in the sun. She is the water you need to grow. She no longer begs to be seen. She demands to be respected. She no longer holds her tongue in fear of being rejected. She breathes life into the universe with the strength of mountains and rage of the sea. She speaks on behalf of all of us. I am every woman. It's all in me. Poem.
Thank you. That's wonderful. That's powerful. Yeah, very well done. Okay, well, now how about we ask Marianne to read her poem? That's also a part of this this project. And the poem is I Can Tell You.
Perfect. So the subtitle to the poem is The Woman with Pockets. And I chose that as a subtitle to, back in the day when women used to wear dresses, sooner they started to have dresses with pockets, and kind of that symbolized equality. So that's kind of where the root of this poem comes from. This is The Woman with Pockets. I can tell you 1,003 ways how men would stare at my figure while they mentally undress me. As I am trying to tell them about who I am, they respond with telling me who they are. But I can decipher the ways of a man when he is interested in my brains or interested in my looks. Although I'm quite flattered that you think I get through life with just a pair of breasts. I just want you to understand that I am just trying to make a sale with all the knowledge I managed to collect. My intelligence at times is never enough, especially when all you can do is think about ways on how you can seduce me. I can tell you 1,002 ways how a man would almost crash and burn his brand new Range Rover off a cliff, breaking his neck just to get one last look. The stares, the car honks, the whistles, the waves, blowing kisses, thirsty men risking themselves just to catch hopeless attention. I collect myself, my integrity, my grace, my respect. I'm not an animal that you whistle at to get their attention. I could tell you there were 1,001 times where I worked toe-to-toe with a man, same age, similar experience. We show up at the same time, we clock out at the same time. My upper hand was I worked faster, smarter, cleaner, more alert, more controlled. I was constantly in a silent competition, racing against gender towards equality, willingly knowing that my competitors see me running in heels with makeup on, painted nails, clutching my purse while pulling my dress down. Even though I make it to the finish line before him, I am still given second place. There is not one time that I wish I would trade who I am, not even a thought. Even though the odds are against me, I even score when I fight just a little bit more. When you mentally let them undress you, look them in the eyes and reveal yourself. Although us women look dainty and fun, we are burning inside with a heated vengeance. We're not here to clean, cook, take care of your children, take care of your health, take care of your house. While you belittle our mentality, it always did boil down to respect. I can prove it to you, and I have a million reasons why.
Thank you. That's outstanding. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. Okay, let's shift gears just a little bit. This is a question that's directed at Allison and Christina, but others can add in, Stefan, if you want as well. Please give the listeners a sense of just how far we've come over the past 100 years as it applies to basic human and societal rights for women. You know, what were the key issues and challenges back then, and where we've come? How about Allison? You want to start?
Sure. Okay, thanks. Thanks so much. And especially thanks to the artists who preceded me here on in the webinar. That's great work. So I'm going to take time and rewind it, to borrow from Thundercat then. I want to make the case that there's been tremendous change in the status of women over the last 100 years. But I would say that the progress has not been like steady. You know, there's back and forth. And I also want to emphasize that the progress has not benefited all groups of women equally at all times. So often, but not exclusively, white middle-class women kind of led change, and then that change kind of reflected their experiences. So it was not always kind of an equitable vision. At the founding of the United States, women are not legally considered people, or, you know, they don't have legal rights kind of outlined in the Constitution. They're not in control of property. They cannot run for office. They do not vote. They would not ever serve on a jury. So obviously that status has changed dramatically. The women's movement of the 20th century changed that extensively. I would say like four ways real quickly. It removed most of the legal penalties placed on women. So obviously women gain voting rights. Other issues like rape law is transformed. Sex discrimination in employment is outlawed. They reimagine women's place in society. The idea that kind of biology is destiny for women gets transformed so that women have more access to higher education. They would be, expected, encouraged to play sports. All kinds of new jobs opened up to women. Just as a footnote to that, like women of color are working in paid labor more than white women from, historically. So it's not that it's innovative, for all women to be in paid employment. I'm not arguing that. Third, feminists named aspects of women's experiences that hadn't really had a name before and talked about those experiences being social problems and not personal problems, like sexual harassment and domestic violence. No words for those experiences prior to feminists identifying them. And then finally, I would say like women, feminists completely transformed healthcare and reproduction. So I would say not to isolate abortion as the main issue. Think about the efforts to end sterilization abuse that affected particularly women of color and poor women, but also reforming abortion law in the late 1960s and early 1970s. Access to contraception. Initially, when the FDA approves the pill, it's only available to married women. So fight for access to contraception, like that's something that had to be won and kind of claimed in the 1960s and 70s. So those are my main issues that I would say like tremendous change, but think about some unfinished business. Obviously, we can talk about overturning Roe v. Wade, but also think about the United States has compared to Europe and Australia and New Zealand, we have like very poor paternity and maternity leave, like no paid parental leave policies, except in some states. So it's not a national paid paid leave for parents. There's no universal pre-K. That was almost part of one of Biden's initiatives, and then it drops out in negotiations. But that has long been like a feminist demand, not one. Think about representation in Congress. Representation in the House and the Senate for women is below 30%, but women make up, more than 50% of the population. So you can think of like kind of poor political representation. You can think of policies that would benefit women, and there's a lot of work still to be done. And those agendas were identified in the 70s and earlier, but have not come to fruition yet. So those are some of the main issues.
All right, thank you. Christina, how about you? What are your thoughts on that in perspective?
First of all, Allison, thank you for kind of the chronological historical timeline of some of that stuff. And Allison hit on the big issues that are still affecting us, frankly. And what I think about most when I think about over the last 100 years is that that's not a very long period of time, and that we're struggling with some of the same issues or clarifying the same issues or putting them into practice is staggering to me. So when I think of the last 100 years, I think of things like relatable periods of time to all of us, our grandmothers, our mothers, and then us. And some of the things that each one of them struggled with throughout their lifetime, or it was their reality, sometimes is not greatly different in our generation, although it presents itself very differently. So the other thing that strikes me is that we can put as much legislation in place, but legislation does not prevent discrimination at its core for anyone, not just the issues that we're talking about. And so we have a lot of work to do there. And when I look at the three big things that we've been working on for women, I totally agree with Allison. It's been primarily things like the gender wage gap and just economic equality for women, voting for women, and particularly for people of color, that has continued to rear its head. We have made strides, 100% agree, but we continue to struggle with some things that just don't seem to make any sense to anybody. And while we have come far, we have. I mean, there are some of us who wouldn't be in the positions that we're in or the jobs that we're in or have the privileges without what our grandmothers and our mothers did. But what was also striking to me when we think about even things like voting rights, which has the ability to change legislation and the trajectory of anybody's life, it was a double whammy for women of color and to be a woman and a woman of color, because there were two very, particularly in the 60s, two very competing things going on just for women, but also for people of color. So there was that struggle of just the gender piece, but also the fact that there was racial discrimination and inequality. So there was that double whammy. And that legacy continues today. It continues in our communities and neighborhoods and families. And so we have come far, but there's so much more work to do, and we can't forget what happened 100 years ago when our grandmothers were dealing with it. And then the third thing is, and I know we're going to touch on it more, is reproductive health. And it is shocking to me. Allison brought up a statistic. It was 1965. I was alive when contraception was, when the Supreme Court said that contraception would be available, but only to married people. So contraception prescriptions and then actual contraception would be available. It's shocking to me that it took another almost 10 years. I think it was, Allison, probably correct me on this. I think it was around 1972 or 3, where it was allowed to be prescribed to somebody who wasn't married. And that's not 100 years ago. So we have a lot a lot of work to do. But I would say those are the three things we struggle. And I'll end this question with a story that really brings it home for me. I remember being in elementary school and going back to school shopping with my mother, who was a very strong, independent woman. She worked in Manhattan for the American Friends Service Committee and Social Justice. And we walked into the store and she chose some things. And it was at the time where women were still not allowed to have a credit card in their own name, which is shocking to me. And we got up to the counter and my mother was buying things for my sister and for me, and she might have thrown a few things in for herself. And we're standing at the counter, and most of the ladies at the salespeople at these counters were women. And she looked at my mother's card and she rang it up and she went back and she said, "Just a minute, please." And this is seared in my memory. And she went back and she got her manager, who was a man, who came out and said, "Mrs. Cresswell, I am so sorry, I cannot complete this sale until I call your husband and ask him if it's okay that you spend this amount of money." And my mother, being the independent, wonderful person that she was, and determined to raise her daughters that way, gave him a dressing up and down, really, about how that was just unfair because it was actually her paycheck that was paying for these items. And that was in my lifetime. And that's something that I've always carried with me, both her reaction to that and her discussion with my sister and I in the car after that happened. And I was in second or third grade.
Wow, that's
John, can I just pick up on a couple things that Christina said? Like, that was great. I really appreciated those stories. And I just to go back to the question of some of the coalitions and then racial divisions in the women's movement. If you think about suffrage, which began the advocacy for women getting the right to vote gains momentum in the second half of the 19th century. And a lot of those women activists come out of the movement to end slavery. Mm-hmm. So there is, for a while, there's a coalition of people, Black and white, men and women, who are pushing for universal suffrage. They want, all Black people to get the right to vote. They want white women to get the right to vote. And then that fragments, and Black men get the right to vote first of that coalition. And then when white women are leading kind of for women getting the right to vote, they take a kind of racist turn and ally with Southern women. And when they get the 19th Amendment passed, they really don't make very many objections to new kind of Jim Crow provisions that are going to prohibit Black people, men and women, from voting in the South. So women, white women leaders who get the right to vote kind of go silent on that issue in terms of, are Southern Black people going to be able to vote? No. And they don't really challenge that. And then at the same time, Black women in the North do gain voting rights. So there's some common cause. It fractures. White women basically buy into racism in their alliance with Southern women to get the 19th Amendment passed. And then there's some benefit for Black women, but not across the board by a long shot. And then just to talk about this issue of 100 years not being a very long time, if you look at the Dobbs decision that overturned Roe v. Wade, you can get a sense of how important history is. And because what Alito says in the majority opinion in Dobbs, he says, if a right that's being considered, so this was a right to have, an abortion in Dobbs, if that right is not written in the Constitution, which abortion is not, Neither is the right to privacy, which is what Roe v. Wade is built on. It's not spelled out, like the word privacy is not in the Constitution. So if the right is not written into the Constitution, it must be deeply rooted in history, according to Alito and the majority of the court, or integral to another right that is so rooted in American history. So if you're part of a group of people who's not included in the Constitution in the first place, like we should not be surprised, should we, that, women's bodies, pregnancy, those things are not in the Constitution because women are not legally persons at that time. So that makes the issue of the history of the status of women absolutely important to their status today, because that's how the court is reasoning through abortion rights today. They could do the same thing with contraception. They could say, there's no right to contraception spelled out in the Constitution. Is contraception part of a right that is integral or deeply rooted in American history? Like maybe they would answer that differently, but history, the history of the status of women is going to be vitally important for defining what some of these rights are today. It's going to be very interesting.
Anyone have anything else to add to that before we talk a little bit about, where we go in the future? Anyone want to add anything?
I actually had a full list topic left out of the conversation, but Allison, thank you so much because you hit every single one of them. I really appreciate it. So now I really have nothing to say because it was already hit.
Okay. Anyone else? Oh, okay. So how about let's shift though. Let's shift moving forward. I mean, where do we go from here? The current and future state of women's rights. We've mentioned the Dobbs decision, but what are the key challenges? How do you move forward? Anyone? Christina, you want to give that a shot?
So there are still systemic systems that keep women in particular from moving forward or being considered at on an equal playing field, even playing ground today. And at Malaga House, we're looking at specifically at women with children who are experiencing poverty and homelessness. And on its surface, that in and of itself is clearly a problem in our community. But the reason why we focus on women with children has a lot to do with this discussion. In the United States, and certainly in Lancaster County, more than 60% of women who are experiencing, of families that are experiencing poverty and homelessness are headed by single women with children. And when we look at that even deeper and you dig into why, many of the things that come up and that came up in our discussion prior to this question have a lot to do with that. The first thing is that women are the providers of childcare and caring in the family. And so when a woman has a child and you're experiencing poverty and homelessness, you're also at a much greater chance of continuing that cycle intergenerationally, because it's very difficult to get a job at a family sustaining wage or find childcare that's affordable. And so women tend to be in a position where they're more likely to not be able to pull themselves out of poverty. And so one of the things that Malaga House focuses on is that wage gap, not just for women, but for people in poverty. And so one of the areas that we primarily focus on is education. When a woman is in survival mode and trying to figure out how she's going to put food on the table when she's working 3 jobs already, school does not come into play. And if it does, there isn't access to educational opportunities that fit that schedule, that fit that childcare schedule, that fit that work schedule. And so what Milagro House does is we remove those barriers and we provide free housing for women with children, in addition to all sorts of a whole scaffolding of support for them, so that they have the luxury of being able to make a choice to get their education so that they can get a job that pays a family sustaining wage. And so while they're with us, they receive everything that they need. They live here free of charge, and they can stay here as long as they're in an education program. And in that time, we're also connecting them with local employers and with networking and job shadowing and mentoring opportunities, so that when it is time for them to find a job after they finish their education, they're already halfway down that road. And we're creating a win-win for our employers locally, in that we're providing the availability of workers in fields that it's difficult sometimes to find people to fill those fields now. So we're looking at it holistically, and particularly at women with children, because we think that moves the needle on poverty alleviation. If 60% of the people that are in poverty are women with children, single women with children.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Yeah. Before we
Can I make it add to John? Just I think some of.
Can you hold one second? I just wanted to mention real quickly. We're gonna get to you. But one of the features of the Songs for Justice project is that each record we feature a community benefit organization that's doing good work in this area. So we're so glad that Christina, you shared with us, the great things that Milagro House are doing. And what we do, we provide them a platform in the record to tell their story to the public. And we also provide 100 records that they can do whatever they want to try to raise money or advance their mission. So that's another part of the Songs for Justice project. And again, we appreciate, Christina, your taking the time to tell us exactly the great things you're doing through Milagro House. But yeah, go ahead, Allison. Mm-hmm.
I was just thinking of some policy implications of the important things that Christina described. And one issue, I think historically also this changes in the 1970s, is like a really strong stigma against single mothers on welfare. And that is primarily like a new racialization of who the welfare recipient is, so that the public support for state help for single mothers is really influenced by racism. And I think we could imagine more generous systems of help coming from the state for women raising their children alone. And right, so what would be some policy demands for that? Because in our lifetimes, we've lived through significant cutbacks and changes in the way American welfare works that have been very punitive towards especially single mothers. So I think that would be a good area for change.
And if I can expand upon that, Milagro House just hosted Stephanie Land recently. She came to Lancaster. Stephanie is the author of the book Made, M-A-I-D. It was a New York Times bestseller, and it was adapted into a mini Netflix series. And if there's one book and one series that anyone can watch that absolutely gives you an accurate picture of what it's like to be a woman in poverty with a child in the United States, it's that. And Stephanie did an amazing job at the end of October. We hosted her. She was at the Fulton. We filled the Fulton. We sold it out. There were 500 community members there, in addition to people who bought tickets. And also we provided tickets to nonprofits who serve women, so that women who wouldn't necessarily have the chance to see Stephanie could see Stephanie. But her overriding message is that we've had all this legislation that has operated within silos to put policies in place to help women and people in poverty in general. But unfortunately, they don't work together all the time. And so the requirements for someone to, as Stephanie says, to prove that they are poor actually makes the situation worse in ways, because it's very difficult to go into one agency and say you need housing and be told that, well, you need a job. But if in order to get a job, you need to have an address. And if you don't have an address, then you can't get a job that's paying you a wage. If you don't have transportation to that job, then you're going to lose your job pretty quickly. And it's going to take one case of the flu or RSV with your child for you to lose your job, because you don't have childcare that's going to be able to help you take care of your child when they become sick. And so there's this domino effect that happens in a nanosecond with women in poverty that they need to handle all of these issues. So we've put this legislation in place over the years, but it hasn't really come together into a package that's cohesive that actually does help women who are in this situation. And I'm just speaking of women in poverty, women, and that is something that we must solve. We must look at the childcare crisis. We must look at the inequality in a child's ability to be successful academically, not just pre-K, not just hit the ground running in kindergarten, but throughout their academic elementary, middle school, high school. We have to look at those things, because if we don't, we're just perpetuating this cycle, this really destructive cycle, not just for the family, but for our community. And women are central to that because it affects them the most. And so historically, I mean, I think it was, again, the 60s or the 70s, you were allowed to discriminate against a woman for a job if she had children in preschool. That's just, that just blows my mind. Now, again, I will say that legislation does not prevent discrimination, and it still happens. It still happens. So if a woman, even if she's not living in poverty, has to stop working or working at a job where she's required to have hours outside of her child's school or preschool, then you know, we're constantly going to have this cycle of this gender gap and this wage gap, where men continue this trajectory in their professions, but women are the ones who generally stop and raise children. And then in that time, they're not earning, their earning power goes down. They're not putting as much into retirement. And so if they come to a point where they're no longer married, where they're divorced, then they're really fighting against this battle of being able to not just afford their present, but afford their future, because they've given those things up to care for children, particularly if childcare isn't affordable. Mm-hmm. For many women, the decision is, does my paycheck go to childcare, or do I just stay home? And that's across the board, not just women in poverty. Right. So we need to look at those things too, because it's over the long range of a woman's lifetime. When she hits retirement, she is not as well prepared as the man is for retirement financially.
Right. Yeah, thank you. That puts it all together, how it's just one thing after another. They just feed off of each other. How about Jackie and Thunda? Marion, you have anything you want to add to that in terms of where we go in the future, and what, from your younger generation, you might have a different perspective on it?
Yeah, you know, I mean, Allison and Christina, thank you very much. I mean, your knowledge on these topics is incredible, and I'm very inspired. But I was thinking about, you know, what happens next with the new generation, and I'm always thinking of, you know, the girl in the album art. Like, what is she looking at right now in the world, and in the next 5 years, 10 years, what's going to happen in her lifetime, and what is she going to want to say? What is she going to want to see the world as? And I was thinking about what happened with Facebook a few years ago and how with technology, how skewed viewpoints and audio snippets, and we have all this AI that's coming out that's going to start really disrupting a lot of true words that are being spoken by people. And technology, at least being this new way that we communicate as the human race across the globe, is really, really important. And we're just talking about the United States, but like these are global issues. And I think, you see it on TikTok, these teens stopped a rally, like a Trump rally. They bought out all the tickets, and it's a joke, but it's not at the same time. And all because of a phone app. And so I think we're going to start seeing more and more things like that as we see these teens who are growing up, 13, 14, reading these history books in online school. And then, they start voting. Like how do we get them to know what's going to help society when they're just 18 and they still don't know anything? Like how do we get them to know what will help and what the ramifications of, checking the wrong box could do? I think that's really important. Yeah.
Anyone else? Thunder, you have anything you want to add?
I feel like my generation and even the ones coming up after me, like, we're doing a really good job at asking questions, being disruptors, not being complacent, figuring things out on our own, taking stands for what we think isn't right. It's all very small in the grand scheme of things, but if we all we have to do is just keep doing that, and then I feel like there could be like some real groundbreaking like change, not just change, but like redefining of how things can be done. Because at the end of the day, things are only the way that they are now because everybody kept going along with it. So if we decide that we don't want to do that anymore, then it doesn't have to be like that.
Marion, anything?
Yeah, I was listening, to a few things this morning. I think to see change, laying down morals that make sense. And I see, and I talk about this a lot, where we're at now. I believe that this is we're living in a very sensitive era, that we try to appease any and every crowd. And I think that is wrong. That's where the morals come in, and laying down foundations that are correct and make sense, because structure, our body wouldn't function if someone just said, I just want to put these bones here because I like the way it looks. Your body's structured to make sense. And that's where I feel that's where I feel as a generation where we're at now is things, and I'm really against a lot of things, but I don't feel as though now things make a lot of sense because we're trying to appease everyone. And yeah, just having morals and foundations and making sure that we're doing things for the right reason and not just for a reason. And that's where I stand on that, is just doing things that make sense and oiling a machine because it makes sense and because we need the machines to work, and not just doing things aimlessly and sensibly. So that's where I stand with that.
All right, thank you. One last
Can I
quick
cir-
question.
Oh, can I
One
circle
last
back, John, to just
Sure,
a couple of the points that came up? I was thinking about the issue of social media, and then to Marion's last point about, like, how do we, like, are we continuing to are we able to like talk to each other on some kind of common ground? And I think social media and the social media environment like encourages like separate bubbles and maybe like more extreme polarity or like extremism. And if you look back in the history of abortion, the like political arguments about abortion in the United States, actually in the early 1970s, late 1960s, they were not as absolutely partisan as it is today. So, for example, there were feminists who, and there still are feminists who are anti-abortion. I'm not saying that that's only a historical issue, but there were feminists who were arguing against abortion, and the position that they took was that you should focus on making motherhood, an easier option for women, so that you should be building up social support for motherhood and improving healthcare and making it easier for mothers to work. And that position in the pro-life movement basically gets jettisoned. Like, you can't make, that's not the argument anymore. But when that argument was there, you can see that that would have had some common ground with, other groups. So there was more diversity in the political ideologies in the abortion debate, like 50 years ago than there is today. It's more divided and it's narrower. Each side narrowed down, and it became like harder for those groups to compromise in any way.
Yeah.
I think that's potentially lost.
Yeah. Thank you for that. One last real quick question, real quick. Because I want to make sure we leave folks out there with like a call to action, what they can do. Well, there are a lot of people who want to do the right thing in supporting, the cause of social justice and equity. What would you say to people to challenge people to act rather than simply talk about justice and equity? Suggestions for actions rather than simply words. Just real quick. Anyone?
Well, I think we have to. I'm sorry, go ahead, Sandra.
I'm sorry. First, you have to, in order to even move forward, this is like a precursor for that. Before you even move to a call to action, you have to stop looking to other people to tell you what the right thing is and decide for yourself.
Okay.
That's my nugget.
Yep. Okay. Anybody else?
Yeah, I think we need to recognize individuals and perspectives from all stripes, and we need to have open and honest conversations that don't come with strings attached that put people in boxes. I think we have to be able to discuss these issues with an understanding that we're not talking about how they affect one person or one group of people. We're talking about how they affect all of us, because like Marianne just said, our bodies are built with bones in certain places, and unless we understand the value and the worth and the reasoning behind each and every one of these issues and how they affect each and every person in our society, we're not going to make a difference. We need to keep moving forward, but we need to do so in a much different way than we are now.
Yeah, and to paraphrase that, a lot of it, you got to do the work, right? You got to do the work. You got to find out the history and then before you can even kind of move forward in an informed, intelligent way. Anyone else on this real quick?
How about imagine yourself as a political candidate? There's like all different kinds of offices to run for, and like maybe you are the political leader that we need. Imagine that that's you. It's not somebody else. It's you.
Mm-hmm. All right. Anyone else real quick, or speak now or forever hold your peace? No, okay. No, that's great. I tell you what, that was really, really great. Thank you all so much for that. I do have to make one last little piece of business here, that if you are interested in anyone out there purchasing a copy of the record, volume 4, you can go to our website, musicforeveryone.org. Look for future volumes. Volume 5 is going to come out next, and that's going to be, we're going to focus on criminal justice reform, which is going to be a really powerful record. And I'm going to leave with a quote, and Thunder, you kind of hit on it about being a disruptor. You know, I think you got to do the work, you got to do the research, but you also have to be a disruptor, right? You got to step forward and talk. But it's that quote by Laurel Thatcher Ulrich, who's an American historian, who said, "Well-behaved women seldom make history." So I guess, you know, go out there and disrupt, and or like John Lewis says, you know, got to get and make trouble, you know, good trouble, necessary trouble. Again, thank you all so much for your time and your contributions to the record, and it's really greatly appreciated, and you all are all doing really important work. So thank you very much.